The night the vow was spoken, the stars did not blink. They watched the desert hold its breath. Wind slid through dry grass and low juniper like a whisper too shy to finish its thought. A thin crescent moon leaned over the canyon, and the river moved like a dark ribbon stitched to the land. He stood between you and the wide world and said, calm as flint, "No one will take you from me." The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. The desert heard them. The sky heard them. And something in the far hills paused, as if even the earth wanted to know what would happen next. He was Apache, a scout who knew how to read a track the way others read a book. He knew where the ground had been pressed a little deeper by fear, where the brush had been bent by a hurried hand, where a thorn had broken and let out its small drop of sap. He had the quiet weight of someone who had seen storms and fires, and the way a river eats a bank grain by grain. He had learned from elders, from the old stories told near embers, from mornings when the sun lifted over the mesas like a slow drumbeat. He did not call himself a warrior. The land did not ask him for that word. He was a keeper, a protector, a cousin to shadows and starlight, and he had made a promise. The promise began long before the words were said. It began the day dust rose, on the northern trail, and voices carried where voices should not be. It began the day a group of men came smiling without their eyes, the kind of smile that lays out a rug so it can pull it from under your feet. They pressed questions like burrs. They had papers. They had plans. They talked about routes and borders, and trades, and only for a while. They talked about safety, while their hands twitched near gun belts they swore they would not use. The desert kept listening. The people kept calm. But fear has a sound, and it traveled lonely across the flats. You were there, small and sharp in the way bright things are. Your laugh had the quick echo of water dropping into a hidden pool. You had a scar on your wrist from a careless mesquite thorn, and the kind of courage that looks like stubbornness until danger shows its teeth. You asked questions nobody else thought to ask. You cut your hair short for the heat and tied a red strip of cloth around it because it felt like a little flame against the heat. You knew how to throw your voice back at the coyotes and make them wonder if you were one of them. You were made of morning light and cliff dust. He looked at you and felt the old stories move in his chest. Some promises are chosen. Some arrive, like rain. At first, there was only talk. The men with the papers came back, different faces, same eyes. They used words like relocation and opportunity and it will be better there. They drew lines on maps that did not show rivers, or ghost trails, or the places where people still leave cornmeal for those who are gone. They promised schools. They promised protection. They promised to keep families together. They said these things in the softest voice they knew. He listened with his head tilted and his mouth a straight road. He knew the shape of a net even when it was thrown from far away. He knew the sound of a lie even when it wore a clean shirt. The day of the vow, the fire was small and steady. Sparks rose like quiet prayers and faded before they touched the first branch of the sky. He had tied the horses far back in the wash, muzzled and content, so their breath wouldn't give a direction away. He checked your boots, your water skin, the straps of your small pack. He put a flat stone in your pocket, because sometimes you need the cool of earth to hold. He taught you how to look at the same hill twice so it wouldn't trick you when the light moved. He showed you the morning star and the line of the scorpion, and how the Milky Way is a river of stories too many to tell in one life. He spoke softly, about ancestors, not as ghosts, but as steady hands at your back. He said the land is a teacher and a witness. He said the stars burn witness too. There are words that go out and come back changed. No one will take you from me was not an order. It was a shield. It was a line in the sand that said, here is love, and here is the world. And the world can be large, but love can be larger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shake his fist at the sky. He simply said it the way he would say his own name. A vow is a path you walk every step of, not a thing you shout once and leave behind. The canyon walls held the echo as if weighing it, and then released it toward the horizon. You asked him what it meant to keep a promise in a place where the wind does not hold still. He smiled without showing his teeth and turned his palm up. "It means we listen," he said. "We listen to the land, to each other, and to the trouble that wants to sneak close. We listen for the softest footfall. We listen for the one thing that doesn't belong, even if it looks small. We listen until the truth has no place to hide." He told you a story of a woman who once followed a thirsty lizard to a spring that nobody knew. He told you how a herd of antelope will bunch and then break, each pretending to be the tail of the other to confuse the hunter. "Even the stars," he said, tipping his chin up, "talk to those who take the time." You tilted your head and tried to hear them. Maybe you did. Night laid its cool hand over the desert. The moon slipped behind a cloud, and the sky grew rich and black, thick with constellations. The fire lowered to a heart. You could taste sage on your tongue just from breathing. In the distance, an owl called, and another answered, like two small bells greeting each other in the dark. He marked the direction of each sound, folding them into a map only he could see. He placed his hand lightly on the ground and waited. Sometimes the earth tells you a footfall through your palm. He felt nothing, then something, then the slight tension of a thought that hadn't become a fact yet. He had left a mark at the last fork in the arroyo, a small arc of pebbles that looked like nothing to anyone but him. It said, "We turned south." He had also brushed his trail with a yucca stalk. It was a polite lie that hid the truth without erasing it. "They will read the obvious and miss the quiet," he said. "Let them follow a story that leads them to a thorn patch." You liked that. You liked the idea that a track could be a sentence and that you could edit it as you went. The desert was full of sentences. Most people never learned the language. He thought of the elders and the last council. He thought of the winter they all tightened their belts and slept close for the warmth. He thought of the first time he saw a government tent shine white under noon sun, and how it looked like a tooth in a mouth that wasn't smiling. He thought of the times people were told they were safe, and he thought of how many of them were not. He did not hate. Hate wastes water. He kept his heart like a clay pot that you fill carefully and share when someone is thirsty. But he did not forgive what had not asked to be forgiven. You held the red cloth in your hair and asked if the stars cared what happened on the ground. He said the stars care by remembering. They keep the old names. They hold the shape of our stories even when we forget the lines. "If we do right," he said, "they hold it. If we do wrong, they hold that too. They will know if I keep this vow." You looked up and tried to find the shape of a bow, a horse, a coyote. You found a new shape, one that looked like a hand, and decided it was the sky's hand on both your shoulders. He told you how to walk when you were being watched, not fast, not slow, but like someone who knows they belong. He told you how to carry your fear so it doesn't rattle. He cut a strip of leather from his own belt and tied it around your wrist, not as a leash, but as a promise you could feel against your pulse. He showed you how to breathe with the land, in and out, the way the river breathes when it rounds a bend. "This is our homeland," he said, but he said it without claiming more than anyone else. He said it like someone saying, "This is my mother," with care, not ownership. Far off, a coyote barked 3 times. He counted, then nodded. "They are closer," he said, and put out the last bright tongue of the fire with a twist of sand. You both stood in the dark. The chill slid in like a careful blade of shade. The horses shifted once and stilled. The river kept its secret tone. He took your hand, and for a breath you were not afraid. Then you felt the old fear return, soft-footed but sure, like a shadow that remembered your name. He spoke to the night in a voice that was almost breath. "If the stars are watching, let them see us stand." He did not ask for victory. He asked for steadiness. He asked for the clarity to tell a true trail from a false one, and for the patience to wait when waiting was the only wise thing. He thought of all the people who had stood where he stood, of all the oaths that had been spoken to children and partners and elders, and to the land itself. He felt them press in, not like a crowd, but like a circle. There was a rustle, not wind. Wind has a rhythm you learn in your bones. This sound had a body. It came from the black crease where two boulders leaned into each other like old friends. Sand gave a faint sigh. A pebble rolled, tiny but certain, and then stopped as if holding its own breath. He made a small click with his tongue, once, twice. The horses did not answer. On the ridge to the west, something, a shape darker than the dark, blocked 3 stars for half a heartbeat and then moved on. He touched your shoulder and pointed, not at the shadow, but at the empty place it left in the sky. There, he whispered, as if you could trace a track across the heavens. You could not, but you believed that he could. You believed because belief is what moves feet when nothing else can. You felt the old stories settle into your ribs, snug as a blanket. The desert held still again, pretending to sleep. He counted to 7 the way his grandmother had taught him when waiting for a rattler to decide whether you were a threat or a rock. At 7, he exhaled, and with that breath he gave the night an answer. He shifted his weight a fraction, so small a mouse would not notice. He angled his body between you and the crease of black. He set his jaw like stone warmed all day and cooling now. He did not repeat the vow. He did not need to. It hung there, bright as a line of sparks lifting from a coal, and the stars burned witness to it, steady and patient. Across the river, another pebble clicked. Then a voice, low and careful, called your protector by a name you had never heard, a name only a few were allowed to use. It floated over the water like smoke that refuses to rise. Your heart stuttered once. His hand tightened on yours, not fear, not force, more like a drumbeat finding its time. He leaned close so you could hear without the night stealing the sound. Do not answer, he breathed. Listen. The river gave back the voice in small pieces as rivers do. You caught only a word, trade, or maybe trail. A second word, safe, or was it save? The kind of word that can wear 2 faces depending on who says it. Then the voice lowered, turned into a hush, and the hush became the kind of silence that has eyes. You remembered his lesson. Some silences watch. You remembered his promise. Some promises stand. He let go of your hand and took 1 step forward, slow enough to count grains of sand. The stars seemed to lean in, and every thorn in the canyon seemed to listen. From the hollow between the rocks came the faint scrape of leather, and then a breath, and then nothing. He waited. You waited. With him, counting to 7, then to 7 again, until numbers felt like stones, heavy in your mouth. At last, from just beyond the crease, you saw the outline of a hat brim tilt, the smallest shift of a shoulder, and a glimmer that could have been a badge or just a drop of water catching starlight. He did not raise his voice. He did not move, faster than the wind. He simply spoke, soft and even. If you know my name, he said, then you know what my vow means. The hat brim stilled. The river went on being a ribbon. And the desert, kind and cruel and honest as always, waited to see which story would be told next, because by dawn, one way or another, this trail would carry a new name. And then, from behind you, where there should have been only the whisper of your own breath and the comfort of empty sand, a heel slipped on a stone and gave a single sharp clap. The sound of someone who had come close enough to hear the vow, and now stood close enough to test it. The sharp clap hung in the air, small as a pebble, loud as a bell. You felt it in your chest before you heard the second, softer scrape. He did not turn. He shifted only his breath, easing it low, so nothing in him would startle. The river kept its rhythm. The stars stayed fixed. His hand hovered near your shoulder, not to pull you, not to push you, just to say, I am here. You knew the lesson. When danger splits, fear tries to run two directions at once. When it does, you pick one direction and let the other pass through. You like wind through grass. He listened with the whole of him, the way he had been taught. The elders had told him that a man who listens with only his ears is half blind. He remembered a winter when he was young and followed a bobcat for a mile, not by prints but by the small feeling that the cold air ahead had been stirred. He remembered his mother telling him a promise is like hot iron. You do not hold it unless you mean to, and once you lift it, you do not drop it. He had lifted it tonight. Stay with your breath, he murmured, barely sound. You felt your lungs. Obey, small, steady, in and out. Behind you came that breath catch of someone who didn't plan to be heard. A knee brushed a stem of yucca. A grain of grit rolled in a slow arc and clicked against stone. He tilted his head a fraction and let the night draw lines between the three sounds. The hidden voice across the river, the shape on the ridge that had blotted stars, and the body now within a few long strides of your back. 3 points make a map. He placed you at the center of it and let his mind lay a trail out, not forward or back, but inward, where calm keeps time. You thought of the first time you met him, long before papers and speeches and the shine of a white tent on the flats. You were smaller then, fast as a quail, and just as prone to darting where you shouldn't. He had found you halfway down a crumbly slope, your shoe wedged under a lip of rock, your pride louder than your fear. He had not laughed. He had not scolded. He had knelt, freed the shoe, and showed you the trick of walking sideways on bad ground. You can love the land and still respect its teeth, he'd said. And it had sounded like the truest thing you'd ever heard. He carried other truths too, and some of them were bones under his skin. He had once worn the coat of a scout for soldiers whose maps did not know your hills. He had guided them away from sacred places without saying so. He had led them on the long route when the short would have meant stepping on graves. He had seen how quickly a handshake turned to a list and how a list turned to a wagon line. He had heard words like treaty and protection and watched them fold in on themselves like paper boats in floodwater. After that season, he had traded the coat for silence and gone back to listening, which is slower but truer. When the men with clean boots came with their new promises, he did not argue. He only watched the way their eyes slid when asked where exactly families would go, how long a while would be, and what would be left behind for the return that never quite arrives. The second scrape behind you came with a whisper, a breath against the stone, as if someone had leaned in to hear. You thinking? He turned then, not his whole body, only his face and the tilt of his chin, and let the quiet find its level. Evening, he said softly to the darkness that had gathered at your back. The word landed like a leaf on still water. No answer. He let the silence stand in front of him like a door that only opens if you do not touch it. Across the river, the low voice tried again. We don't want trouble, it said, soft enough to claim innocence, clear enough to carry. We only want to talk. There's been a mistake. The office in the city sent the wrong papers. We can fix it. He glanced at you and you saw the small shift at the corner of his mouth that meant a lie was walking around in a new suit. You crossed 3 ridges to tell us that? He called back mild. The badge shimmer, or starlight maybe, held steady. The hat brim made no new sign. He spoke to you without looking. Remember the creek past the low cottonwood, he said. You nodded, though you expected he felt it through the leather at your wrist. It has 2 mouths. One shows, one does not. If we need it, take the mouth that does not. If we do not need it, do not even think its name. A hidden thing loses power when your mind gets loud with it. You swallowed and let your mind go quiet, as if you were smoothing sand with a palm. He had learned that trick as a boy when his uncle took him to a place where water seeped from rock so slowly you could not see it move, only the way the moss lay down. The land keeps some doors small, his uncle had said. Small doors keep out big trouble. Later, when soldiers asked him for the fastest routes, he had given them the big doors and watched them hurry through. He had not lied. But truth can be shaped by what you do not say. The older he got, the more he understood that shape matters. The body behind you chose then to speak. A voice like dry grass, younger than you expected. "Don't be scared," it said, too quick. The words had a tremble to them, the kind that comes from someone who is more scared than anyone else in the circle. He lifted his hand, palm out, and you felt your breath settle again. "If you meant—" "Us no harm," he said to the unseen one. "Your heel would have learned the ground before it learned your boot." A small pause, then in a rush. "I followed because they did. I thought you had food. I thought—" The voice stopped as if a hand had been set on its shoulder from farther away. He understood that kind of stop. He had seen it in camps when a boy started to sing something he shouldn't, and a mother's eyes cut the sound in half. He knew there were strings in the night now, pulled from somewhere past the ridge, from a camp or a wagon or a quiet tent with a lantern shaded low. Strings tugged a voice. Strings held a badge still. Strings waited to see what the promise would do when pressure came. He knelt and touched the ground, 2 fingers light as moth wings. The earth was warming itself with the last of the days. Heat, and in that warmth he felt a faint tick where boot leather had pressed. He read the tick. It told him the unseen one behind you was young and trying to stand tall. It told him the hat brim across the river belonged to someone who tried to walk like he owned the trail, but had learned that swagger wears a hole in the soul. It told him the shape on the ridge had weight, not 1 man, 2, maybe 3. One moved, like a hunter. One the way a clerk moves when the world puts him outside of tables and chairs. He breathed that knowledge in and let it find its place. He had not always been a man with a vow. Once he had been a runner who loved nothing more than to race the shadow of a hawk down a wash and lose. He had been careless with his luck because luck seemed endless. Then a summer came lean and mean. The old woman who wove baskets got sick. The child who carried messages between camps did not arrive. A fire started where it should not have. He learned then that care is not the enemy of joy. It is the shape that holds it. He learned that you cannot stop all trouble, but you can slow it, turn it, confuse it, wear it out, teach it to take the long way around. When the men with the papers first spoke to the council, he stood at the back and watched dust rise from their wagon wheels like a small, constant storm. The speaker had smooth words. He had maps where rivers looked like blue ropes and mountains looked like neat gray cakes. The elders listened and asked for time. Time, the speaker said, was the one thing they could not spare. That is how you know someone is not telling the whole truth. The land is full of time. It moves slow or fast as it needs. Only people try to trap it. Now time thinned in the canyon, stretched tight. The river was a thread. The stars were bright pins. He raised his voice only enough to cross the water. "If there is a mistake," he called, "you can bring it at sunup to the cottonwood. Come with your papers and the one who signed them. Come with the man who says families will not be split. Come with the woman who says the school is ready. Come with the truth that has a face and a name. Do not come with night." The brim tilted. The badge glint, if it was that, did not move. The voice returned, polite as a guest at a table he had not earned. "We cannot wait for morning." A pause. "There are orders." He smiled without kindness. Orders are a kind of storm that falls hardest on whoever is standing lowest. "Then the orders can wait for you," he said. "We will not be taken by night." The word taken slid across the water and sat there, heavy as a stone you cannot pocket. Behind you, the young voice made a small sound, not a word. You turned a little, enough to see a shape separate from the dark. A boy, thinner than his voice had suggested. A scarf at his neck that looked like it had been washed more with wind than with water. His boots were too big. His hat was borrowed. He held his hands out from his sides, empty. His eyes were wide the way a deer's are wide when it wants the path and the brush both at once. He looked at you, and then at the man beside you, and then at the gap between the boulders, and you could tell he was counting choices like beads. The scout, your guardian, spoke low so only you could hear. If the boy goes, let him. If he runs, at you, step aside. If he asks for water, give it. If he asks you to follow, do not. If he asks you to talk, listen first to what he does not say. You filed each line away like a stone stacked at the edge of a trail. The night breathed again. Somewhere an owl shifted its perch and the cottonwood leaves made their small handclap sound. He thought of stories his grandfather told about vows, made under sky so clear you could count the tiny dark between stars. In one, a man promised to carry another through a flood. He did, but the one he carried turned out to be a task that would follow him to old age, showing up each spring at the river's biggest bend, asking again to be lifted. Some promises are seasons, his grandfather had said. They come, back and test if you still mean them. He wondered if this night was that first spring for his vow. Across the river, the brim finally moved. A hand rose, palm open. Peace, maybe, or a signal to whatever waited on the ridge. We don't want anyone hurt, the voice said. He heard the careful way the words balanced on their edges, ready to tip either way. Then do not come closer, he said. The river is a good witness. Let it keep the space. The boy behind you shifted, as if the space the man offered was a rope, stretched tight and singing with the pull. He told you once that mystery is not only about what you do not know. It is also about what you do know and cannot bear to name. The mystery tonight had a shape, the path they had chosen to reach you, the way the stars had been blotted, the young one pushed forward like a soft point on a hard spear. It had a taste, metal on your tongue that was not blood, only the night's breath on old rock. It had a sound, the river smoothing itself against stone, never in a hurry, always getting where it means to. You remembered the council's last talk before you slipped away to this canyon. People had argued with tired voices. One woman said she was done moving and would tie herself to her doorway if anyone tried to lift her. An old man said the doorway belonged to the wind before it belonged to any of them. A mother said her son learned letters from a trader's ledger and now could write his name. We won't go where his name is only a number, she said. There had been no vote that finished anything. There was only the way people stood when they stood together, and the way they looked at him, the scout who spoke little and did what he said. In the camp beyond the ridge, there would be a cook fire turned low, a kettle lid rattling from time to time, a man keeping a ledger even out here, a horse with scarred knees, a woman wrapping her blanket tighter and telling herself that what they were doing was for someone's safety. Plans built far from the canyon often wear good intentions like a clean shirt, but a clean shirt does not change the weather. He thought of this and let his thoughts fold back into the space between his breaths, the place where decisions live. Before they step into the world, the boy swallowed and spoke again, to you this time. I'm not here to take you, he said, and stumbled on the last word as if it were a stone. They said he would come after dark because the heat, because the day. His eyes flicked toward the water and then to the ridge, measuring consequences. If you go now, it will be easier, he whispered, almost pleading. He did not say for whom. He looked at the boy and saw the truth not in the words, but in the way the boy's fingers kept flexing and then making reluctant fists. He had been sent to be a bridge. He was not built for it. Bridges break if you make them carry more than they can. What is your name? the scout asked softly. The boy blinked, surprised by the gentleness. He gave a name that tasted of dust and hard chores. The scout nodded, as if receiving a gift. "This is not your night to be a rope between men," he said. "Go back to the one who sent you. Tell him dawn is the only hour that has any honesty in it. Tell him we will meet at the cottonwood if he comes as he says, with papers, with the signer, with the truth in daylight." The boy's throat worked. He looked to the ridge, to the river, to you. "If I go back without you," he said, "it will be worse." He did not say what worse meant. He did not need to. The night made room for the fear and held it like a bowl holds water. A new sound, small but sure, came from the ridge then. The clink of metal nudged against stone, the shift of leather as someone reached for something not because he meant to use it, but because his hand needed a reason to be busy. The brim across the river turned toward that ridge shadow, and in the turn you heard the soft crack of patience beginning to dry and lift at the edges. He stepped a little in front of you, the way a tree steps in front of wind without moving its roots. "Listen," he said, "to everyone and to the desert itself. We are not leaving by night. We are not speaking more until sun. We are not giving fear the big door." He could have shouted. He did not. He let the words sink like stones through water until they hit the riverbed. The river took them and kept moving. In the space after his sentence, a shooting star stitched a thin, bright line above the cottonwood, so quick you almost doubted you'd seen it. The ancients called such lights sky embers, proof that the fire up there never goes out. You felt your chest loosen for a breath and then tighten again as the boy stepped backward, one foot, then another, torn between two orders, his own good sense and the voice that had sent him. Across the water, the brim tipped in the ghost of a nod, as if daylight had not been part of the plan and now had to be. On the ridge, a figure lowered into a crouch, the kind that means a long wait is about to begin. Between the rocks near your shoulder, the dark held like a third lung. The vow stood where it had been spoken, bright and quiet. The stars burned witness, steady as stone, as the night pressed in around the circle, waiting to see which would give first, the promise, the orders, or the thin thread of patience pulled tight between them. The boy lingered, shifting his weight, like a branch bent under too much wind, while the ridge shadow crouched and the brim across the river kept still. Tension stitched the canyon into one tight thread. The scout's vow hung heavier now, no longer just words spoken to the stars, but a living shield standing against three unknown intentions. You could feel the pull of each angle, the boy's fear, the ridge's silence, the river's divide, and the weight of papers written far away that claimed authority over the ground beneath your feet. The scout's eyes never left the dark shape near the boulders. He did not need to stare at the boy. He read him from the tremble in his jaw, from the half-step back he took without knowing it. "You're hungry," he said finally, voice low, as though stating the time of day. The boy froze, then nodded. "Once." "And thirsty?" Another nod. You felt your own throat dry just hearing it. The scout eased the water skin from his side, not throwing it, not rushing, simply placing it on a flat stone a few paces forward. "Take it, and take care. But understand, the water doesn't carry you back with us." The boy hesitated, then darted forward, snatched the skin, and retreated, holding it close as though it were more precious than the badge glint or the orders pressing from the ridge. He drank, too fast, spilling some down his chin. He wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve and glanced at you again, like he wanted to speak but could not bend the strings holding him. His silence carried as much weight as the men across the river. The scout shifted, letting the boy's small retreat fold into the larger night. His thoughts stretched back to the council fire again, to the voices that had broken like waves against each other. One elder had spoken of ancestors who crossed deserts with nothing but faith in the stars. Another argued that the people could not live on memory alone. that new promises had to mean something. Between them, silence stretched, waiting for someone to say which promise, old or new, would be trusted. No one had answered. That silence had followed him here, into this canyon, into the moment where his vow now stood against strangers' orders. The ridge shadow shifted at last, rising enough for starlight to sketch a shoulder and the long line of a rifle. The scout saw it and made no sudden move. He simply set his body a little more square in front of you. His silence said what his words did not. If they forced this path, it would not be an easy one. You remembered something he told. You once by the river. Conflict isn't always the clash of weapons, he'd said, but the clash of truths that refuse to bend. You felt the truth of that now. Their truth was written on maps, in offices far away. His truth was carried in the bones of the hills and the stars above them. Both truths stood in the canyon tonight, neither ready to bow. The boy fidgeted, looking between the ridge and the river, torn. He finally whispered, "They'll come anyway, if you don't go. They don't stop." His words weren't threat, but warning. The scout's eyes softened, just for a breath, before he looked back to the water. "Then let them come in daylight," he said. "Let them walk the trail where the truth can see them." The brim across the river tipped again, faint, then vanished into shadow as the figure stepped back. It was not retreat, only repositioning, like a chess piece sliding to a stronger square. The ridge shadow settled deeper, patient. The boy clutched the water skin and shifted closer to the rocks, as though trying to make himself invisible. The night thickened around you, and in its quiet came memory, not yours, but his. He thought of a time long ago when he had trailed soldiers through the scrub. They had moved careless, talking too loud, leaving tin scraps behind. He had read their path like a story, each mistake another line. He remembered how the land had hidden him, how he had slipped through mesquite and rock while they never once looked up at the hawks circling above them. That night, he had promised himself he would never walk blind in someone else's story. Tonight, that vow sat beside the new one, both pressing heavy but steady in his chest. The river whispered on. Somewhere down its course, a coyote called, sharp and quick, answered by another farther off. It reminded you of his earlier warning, some silence is watch. You realized then that the canyon itself was listening, waiting to see who would shape its story. The boy sank down near the boulders, clutching the water skin. He looked smaller now, less like a messenger and more like a child caught in a net too wide for him. You wondered what promises he had been given. Perhaps food, perhaps safety, perhaps just the illusion of belonging. Promises could pull as hard as fear, sometimes harder. The scout watched him without judgment. "You'll have to choose soon," he said quietly, almost kindly. "Choose if your steps belong to the ones across the river, or if they belong to you." The boy dropped his gaze, as though the stars themselves weighed too heavy to meet. The high night pressed on, the air cooling, each breath hanging longer before fading. Suspense grew, not from movement, but from the stillness, the way every figure held their place, waiting for the next word, the next sound, the next misstep, to break the fragile thread. You felt it in your bones. The conflict was not just about the men across the river, or the boy, or even the ridge shadow. It was about what would happen to the promise he had made under the stars, and whether the vow could stand against the storm still gathering on the edges of the canyon. The stars burned above, relentless witnesses, as the night waited, coiled, and tense for the story to move. The canyon had gone so quiet that every heartbeat sounded like it might echo against the stone. The river still whispered, but even its steady voice seemed hushed, like it was waiting for something heavy to fall. The boy clutched the water skin close, shifting in the dark like a shadow that wasn't sure where it belonged. Across the river, the brim had vanished into black, though you knew the man still watched. On the ridge, the crouched figure hadn't moved for what felt like forever, patient as stone but dangerous as a coiled snake. The scout stood still, his shoulders squared, his vow stretching invisible but unbroken between him and the night. He said nothing now, because words are like sparks. Sometimes they light the way, sometimes they burn what they touch. He let silence be the shield, and you felt its weight cover both of you. You remembered what he had told you once on a long walk through the dry flats. The hardest moment is not when they come at you. It's when they wait. Waiting sharpens fear sharper than any blade. You felt the truth of that now, with the stars overhead pressing down like 1,000 eyes, and the unseen figures tightening the ring around you. The boy's breathing grew uneven. He looked at you, then at the scout, then toward the ridge. His lips parted, but no words came, only a shaky inhale that broke too loud against the canyon wall. The scout turned his head slightly, as if listening to more than the boy's breath. He was listening for the change, the instant when patience turns to action. Far above, an owl let out one long note, not the calm kind, but the sharp, warning kind. It carried across the canyon, cutting through the night. The scout's eyes narrowed. He tilted his chin toward the ridge, then toward the river, as though weighing where the first strike would fall. You felt the tension thicken, every sound now a signal, every silence a threat. The brim's voice rose again from across the water, sharper than before, though still measured. This can't wait for dawn. Orders say tonight. If you refuse, it'll be taken from you. Don't make it harder than it has to be. The words were calm on the surface, but underneath they carried something harder, finality, the sound of a decision already made somewhere far from here. The scout's answer came slow, each syllable deliberate. No one will take what is mine. To protect. Not by night, not by order, not by threat. His vow grew louder without raising his voice. You could feel it pulsing, alive now, stronger than the silence itself. The boy flinched at those words, like he had just realized the line had been carved too deep to cross. He held the waterskin tighter, then shuffled back toward the rocks, half vanishing into the darkness. He was no longer a messenger. He was a witness, trapped between sides that had already chosen. The ridge moved then. Not much, just enough to let the faint gleam of metal catch starlight, the long, slow arc of a rifle barrel adjusting its aim. You felt your chest seize. The scout did not flinch. He shifted his body a fraction closer to you, a wall of silence and steady breath. The river itself seemed to pause, as if the current feared making noise in the middle of this standoff. The stars blazed brighter, cold and unblinking, watching as the circle drew tighter around the vow. Every second stretched into a rope pulled to breaking. You could feel the climax approaching, a storm building in the dark, the air itself heavy, with the weight of what must come next. And then, just as the brim's figure stepped back into sight and the ridge shadow lowered to one knee, you heard it. A sound carried faint on the wind, far off but growing. Hooves, more than one. Horses cutting across the flats, pushing fast. Whoever waited beyond the canyon was no longer waiting. They were coming. The scout drew in a long, steady breath. His eyes on the stars. His hand brushed yours just once, the touch quick but grounding, as if saying, "Be ready." The vow burned between you, bright as fire. And the night, heavy with suspense, bent toward the breaking point where promise, order, and fate would collide. The sound of hooves rolled through the canyon like distant thunder, growing sharper, faster, until even the stones beneath your feet seemed to vibrate. The brim across the river stiffened, his hand dropping lower, while the ridge shadow froze mid-motion, waiting. The boy's eyes darted wild as if he might bolt, but the scout lifted his hand slightly, calm and steady, and the boy stilled like a rabbit sensing a hawk. The scout turned his face toward the sound, eyes narrowed, listening not just to the rhythm of hooves, but to the count of them. His lips moved faintly as he counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3, then more. A small group, not an army, but enough to tilt the night into danger. The horses reached the outer edge of the canyon and slowed, their riders careful, voices carrying faintly on the wind. Orders barked low, no laughter, no talk of camp. This was no wandering patrol. This was a unit sent with purpose. The brim across the river straightened, calling toward the sound, and though the words were too faint to catch, the intent was clear. Reinforcements had come. The scout's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. He only pressed his heel lightly into the sand and drew a breath deep into his chest. The vow still burned, sharper now, a flame against the cold press of the night. You could feel your own heartbeat tripping, your palms damp, your throat dry, but you remembered what he told you earlier. Fear rattles if you let it. You pressed it down, held still, and listened. The river whispered like a warning, and the stars leaned close, brighter than they had been all night, as if they too were preparing for what was to come. The riders appeared at last, shapes dark against the eye, starlight, fanning along the edge of the canyon. Their horses snorted, stamping at the scent of tension in the air. The leader rode forward, lifting a lantern high. The flickering light cut through the shadows, revealing faces drawn tight, hands already near weapons. By order, the leader. Cold, voice echoing sharp. You'll come with us now. No need for this to turn bad. We've got wagons waiting. Food, shelter, school for the children. You'll be treated fair. The words sounded polished, well-worn, like a speech spoken many times before. But the canyon made it clear how hollow they were, every syllable bouncing back in echoes that seemed emptier each time. The scout stepped forward, his shadow stretching long across the ground. His voice was steady, the calm of stone holding back. Floodwater. We will not be taken. We walk where we choose. If you come with truth and sun, we will meet you. If you come with night and orders, you will find only resistance. A murmur rippled among the riders. Some shifted uneasily. The leader's lantern trembled slightly, the flame bending with the shake. One of the men on the ridge raised his weapon, higher, but the leader snapped his hand, and the barrel lowered, though not fully. Tension hung between all of them, like a rope stretched to its breaking. The boy at the rocks finally found his voice, breaking into the silence. "Listen to him," he said, his words cracking but urgent. "He won't bend. You can see it. He'll stand till dawn if he has to. He means it." The leader turned his head, surprised by the voice, then frowned when he saw it was one of his own, the youngest. For a moment the boy looked like he might be struck down for speaking, but the scout placed himself taller, as though shielding even this boy, and the leader's hand froze in midair. "What you're doing," the scout said slowly, "is not safety. It is taking. You talk of food and schools, but you mean control. You mean splitting families. You mean writing names until people forget their own. You say this is for us, but it is for your order." The lantern flame flickered wildly, caught in a gust of canyon wind. The leader's face shifted, not hard anymore, but uncertain. He looked to his men. Some met his eyes, others looked away, staring at the horse's ears or the shifting shadows. Even soldiers know when a promise is cracked. The scout raised his hand to the stars. "These are our witnesses," he said, his voice carrying clear. "The river, the sky, the land, and the truth of my vow. No one will take us. Not while I stand. If you wish to carry us, you must first carry the weight of breaking this vow. The land will see. The stars will not forget. And neither will you." The canyon grew silent again, the kind of silence that feels heavier than sound. Even the horses lowered their heads, restless but hushed. The leader's grip on the lantern tightened, then loosened. He sighed once, long and low, and for the first time his voice lost its polish. "You don't make this easy," he said. "Orders are orders, but maybe morning will tell the truth better than night." He lowered the lantern, turning his horse slightly back. "We wait till dawn. Then we see." His words were not surrender, but they were not force either. They were a pause, a thread stretched out a little longer. The brim across the river shifted, then melted into shadow. The ridge shadow rose, then backed away into the rocks. The riders slowly turned, pulling back, circling wide to camp along the edge of the flats. The canyon exhaled. The boy with the water skin sat trembling, staring at the scout as if he couldn't believe what he had just seen. He whispered, "They'll come back stronger in the morning." The scout only nodded, calm. "Then the truth will stand stronger too." You felt the tightness in your chest loosen just a little, though fear still burned steady. The scout guided you to the embers of the fire, rekindling it small, enough for warmth, but not to draw eyes. He spoke softly as you sat. "They think dawn will break me. They don't know the vow isn't mine alone. It belongs to the land, to the ancestors, to you. As long as you carry it, it cannot be broken." The boy edged closer, uncertain. "What happens if they bring more men?" he asked. The scout looked into the flames. "Then we keep walking. The land will guide us to doors they cannot see. The stars will show us the trail. A vow doesn't end when tested, it grows." The night stretched long, but now it carried a different weight, less of fear and more of waiting. The owl called again, softer this time. The river flowed steady, carrying the vow away, but also carrying it everywhere. You leaned against the scout, the red cloth in your hair brushing his shoulder, and closed your eyes for a moment. The stars burned witness above, brighter than ever, holding the memory of this night. When dawn finally touched the horizon, the riders would return. There would be more words, more pressure, more choices. But the vow had already been written into the sky, into the river, into your very breath. It was no longer just his promise, it was yours too. The boy, caught between sides, drank the last of the water and whispered, almost to himself, "No one will take you." His voice was small, but it carried. The scout turned his head and gave him a single nod. In that nod was forgiveness, was understanding, was an invitation to step out of the strings that bound him. The sun rose, red and slow, spilling its light into the canyon. The men would come, the conflict would not vanish, but the stars had seen, and the land had heard. And as you stood in that first light, with the vow burning steady inside you, you knew the truth. Promises made under the stars do not break. They only pass from one heart to the next, carried forward like fire. The story of the night would live on, not as the tale of orders and maps, but as the tale of a vow too strong to be taken, a promise the desert itself chose to remember. And in that memory, there was freedom.